without conscientiousness being at the base of it in some sense, because conscientious people do what they say they're going to do. They're industrious, they keep things in order. A lot of that's the basis for the kind of interpersonal trust that's necessary to set up complex trading systems. And as an individual trait, as I said, if you're conscientious, not only do you do better in life, but by the time you're middle-aged or so, your life quality seems to be much higher. So, being conscientious seems to be a good long-term, medium to long-term strategy. So, that all sounds pretty positive, but then one of the things that a multitude of labs have been looking at over the last few years, including mine, is what happens if conscientiousness is taken too far. And it kind of looks, this is work that hasn't been published yet, but it's based on some of the new personality models that I've been looking at that have been derived using a different technique, a semantic analysis technique instead of factor analysis. And what appears to be the case is that any of the traits become pathological if you push them too far. So whatever virtue is, it can't be identified with a particular trait. I mean, I don't know what virtue would be from a Big Five perspective, but it doesn't look like you could localize it specifically. Maybe it's something like the appropriate situational balance of the temperaments, or one of the things I've been thinking is that maybe as you mature, your width of temperament increases, so that maybe your baseline for conscientiousness is sort of average, but as you mature, your ability to be very conscientious when it's necessary and your ability to not be conscientious when it's necessary are more thoroughly developed and differentiated, so that you could match your behavior more particularly to the demands of given situations. Maybe that's something like the development of wisdom. But anyways, it turns out that it appears that conscientiousness can take a very vicious turn if it's pushed beyond a certain point. And it also appears that perhaps the point at which conscientiousness is really positively associated with the success of individuals and maybe the success of nations is also relatively close to the point where if you push it any farther, it starts to kick back very badly and things go downhill. And so that's the sort of thing that we're going to discuss today. So we'll put it in its context first. You remember the highest order personality traits are plasticity and stability, and plasticity is made up of extroversion and openness. Those are good predictors of long-term creative achievement. And then there's stability, and stability is associated with conscientiousness, emotional stability, and agreeableness. And we're going to concentrate on conscientiousness today, which is obviously, that's industrious and orderliness at the Big Five aspect scale level. Now, when we derived the Big Five aspect scale, so broke the Big Five down into 10, it wasn't clear to begin with what the aspects were going to be useful for, because when you do statistical analysis like that, you're just pulling out a semantic structure, and there isn't really any necessity that those additional differentiations that you make are going to have practical utility. But it's turned out that the distinction between orderliness and industriousness is extremely useful. So one of the things we know, for example, is that orderly people tend to be more conservative. So we know that conservative people tend to be more conscientious, but it seems to load specifically on orderliness. Now, you might say, well, that's not so surprising to associate the right wing with orderliness. But it is surprising because we didn't know that orderliness was a subset of conscientiousness. And so people have been trying since the end of World War II to slot the idea of the authoritarian personality into standard personality models. And that's been extremely difficult to do. And so one hypothesis has been that conservative people, because they're more xenophobic and they're more anti-immigration and they're more anti-gay rights and that sort of thing. And one primary theory has been that that's because they're more afraid. But the problem is that conservatism isn't associated with neuroticism to any degree at all. And when it is, it seems to be reverse. It seems that the conservatives are less plagued by neuroticism than liberals are, say. So, you could make the hypothesis that the conservatives are so conservative that they're covering up their fear to such a degree that it actually reverses. But, really, you gotta be pretty damn convinced of your theory to hold on to it when the data seem to indicate that the actual opposite is true. And so, here's some items. You guys can take a look at this. So this is how you would distinguish orderliness from industriousness. I wouldn't worry about the slides, okay, because I'm going to cut them in. Okay. So anyways, so if you're orderly, you don't leave your belongings around, obviously. You like order, well, there's a surprise. You keep things tidy, you follow a schedule, so you order your time. That's definitely a good predictor of productivity. You're bothered by messy people. And bothered is an interesting word, right? Because if you're orderly and you're somewhere messy, and it bothers you, you might think, well, exactly what it is that you're experiencing when you're bothered. You know, I know if I go to a place that's in real disarray, it looks like people have been failing to live up to their responsibilities, say it's a visceral sensation. I really don't like it. I'm very strongly compelled to put things in order. You know, and but it's obviously a negative emotion, but it's not the kind of negative emotion that seems to load on neuroticism. So it doesn't seem to be fear or anxiety or emotional pain or frustration or disappointment or any of those things. So then you might ask, well, you know, what's left? Bothered. Wants everything to be just right. Dislikes routine. Opposite, obviously. Orderly people like routine. They see that rules are observed and they want every detail taken care of. Well, you can see that in some ways orderliness is the soul of bureaucracy, right? Because everything in its place and a place for everything is basically the sort of hallmark of an orderly person. Well, in my clinical practice, I've certainly observed that people who are really disorderly and really high in neuroticism, they just never improve. You know, because their fear and their anxiety sort of paralyze them into immobility, and the fact that they're low in conscientiousness or low in orderliness means they will never do anything, and then disorder grows around them, and that exacerbates their anxiety and their fear. And it's like it's a real catastrophe. So, and then so that's where the conservatives are different. They're more orderly than liberals are. Industriousness, liberals and conservatives seem to be about the same. So industrious person carries out their plans, they don't waste time, they don't find it difficult to get down to work, they don't mess things up, they finish what they start, they put their mind on the task at hand, they get things done quickly, so there's an efficiency element to it. They don't postpone decisions, and they aren't easily distracted. And so industrious people tend not to procrastinate, and procrastination actually seems to be something like low industriousness and high neuroticism. So, you know, it's a very pernicious phenomena, and procrastination can really drive people stark raving mad.